As I've mentioned earlier in my thesis, I've been an avid explorer of different ways of looking at learning and improving myself, and particularly since the mid-70s, I've worked with a whole lot of things like inner game, Erickson, shiatsu and so on. And when asked why I'm doing these things, I've usually been quite matter-of-fact. To improve my golf or to improve my consulting practice. And as you might recall, I decided to do the PhD originally in order to focus my range of interest and contain all these ever-widening explorations. Anyway, this was still an issue for me by the time I got to Bath in 2002. So once I got there, I started to think a bit more deeply about why am I doing all these things? What's it all about? And strangely, one day an answer came to me. I was driving back from Bath along the M4, and suddenly this phrase leapt out at me: "You're seeking roots in the future." That's what you're doing, you're seeking roots in the future. And I thought, well, it's rather strange. I kept open about it, and when I started talking about it in the class at Bath, my colleague students thought it was rather amusing and imagined me suspended from my feet in the air. But after a while it started to make some sense. And yes, perhaps this was a way of looking at all the intensive personal development I've done. More than 25 years. I mean, since leaving South Africa in the mid-60s, I had felt a little rootless, and despite settling down in the UK and having a family and having interesting work, I'd always felt a bit on the boundary. And so maybe this search for roots was an unusual kind of search for a new sense of identity. Not going back to South Africa to find my roots there, but looking forward to what I was doing and planning to do in the future. To build up a new kind of development foundation for myself. Now, I didn't know the term at the time, but I can definitely see now that it was a primitive reaction, Wittgenstein's term, a primitive reaction that suddenly came out of the blue and caught me by surprise and, in a sense, stopped me in my tracks for a moment. You're searching for roots in the future. And this reaction didn't just fade away, it stayed with me. And over time I began to sort of almost feel possessed by it. and started to work at it in a more kind of regular way, if you like. And used it to look at my experiences, to explore them, and see how it made sense of what I was doing. I guess I've since come to understand that what I was doing during this period was indwelling the subsidiaries, as what Polanyi calls it, of this idea, and sort of testing out incrementally how it made sense of what I was doing, finding the edges of relevance and so on, and in the process building up a rich body of experiences, momentary experiences, which might be involved in me performing this as a practice. So this was happening over a period of some time, and I think maybe what I was involved in is what Hubert Dreyfus calls heuristic inquiry. And as I was doing this, the name of the game seemed to shift quite a lot over a period of a couple of years, perhaps in three main ways. First of all, this idea of seeking roots changed to a much more active process of rooting. So not looking for roots out there, something objective out there, but more of a process verb. Actually rooting myself in what I was doing, perhaps in a rhizomatic sort of way, with all these different experiences, and learning a bit about what I was doing in different situations. And also, to some extent, starting to think about my different working relationships. And this primitive reaction then took another move, which was to think about it as not just me rooting something, but me doing it in relationship. So whatever I was doing, perhaps learning a new way of facilitating large groups, I was doing this as a basis for actively rooting myself in these relationships and seeking a sense of identity in those relationships. And then the third move, which came from many more of these experiences, was to locate the rooting process in I think what Stacy calls the living present. So in other words, I was using this this idea popularized by Sharma, presencing, to presence myself in those moments of interaction with others. So really, in quite short order, well, I guess 2 years isn't quite short order. Over a couple of years, this first metaphor of seeking roots in the future was modified to take into account the more active process of rooting, to see that rooting happening in relationship, and also to see it as a momentary thing, something that happened in the moment, and in a sense created my future in the moment. And I suppose that's started to make me think of the word becoming as what I was doing. I was finding out, creating who I was in a process of becoming with others in that relationship. So it wasn't just I was doing activities to improve my practice or whatever. I was actually doing something about my sense of identity. And I guess I started to realize that this sense of identity could be something I was realizing in my everyday relationships with my students and with clients in the development work I was doing. Now, I think part of the influence for this move towards becoming came about because of work we did at COP in the first year, when we were introduced to what I started to call the four ologies, and the need for having some alignment between the four in any research we did. Originally, I got interested in the idea of epistemology. I think perhaps through my experiences with Ken Gergen, who introduced me to the idea of social constructionism. And I got rather attracted to this idea that we construct our realities in our conversations with others and the importance of language in this process. So I remember I started talking about having a relational epistemology. It sounded good. There weren't too many references to it on the internet, and Jack Whitehead quite liked the idea. But I was struggling a bit with it because I could see how I might create a methodology to go along with that, but I wasn't really that sure about an ontology that would fit. So this idea of becoming in relationship, which I came to eventually, I think fitted well with that, and I started to feel a bit more comfortable with the process. So in a sense, in these sort of perhaps three years of what I regard now as indwelling activity, this initial primitive reaction of searching for roots in the future had become a much more developed and embodied and influential metaphor for me. And although there was still more to come, I think this reaction had become, in Wittgenstein's term, a new language game for me, concerned with how I'm orientating myself towards others and making sense of my educational relationships and practices with others, and not just with the MA students, but also with clients and